The Lee Family Murders, South Korea. Welcome back. Tonight we gently turn our attention to a case from South Korea, a narrative that slowly unfolds, revealing layers of familial discord, quiet desperation, and ultimately a sorrowful crime that rippled through a nation. For many, these stories become a soft murmur in the background as slumber approaches. Before you drift, perhaps consider, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Are you nestled in a cozy, familiar space, or perhaps finding a moment of quiet reflection away from the day's bustle? Allow your thoughts to settle, your breath to deepen as we begin. Our journey commences on a gentle, late winter morning, specifically February 26, 2019, within the quiet rhythm of Ansong, a city nestled in South Korea's Gyeonggi province. The air still held the lingering chill of winter's embrace, yet a subtle promise of spring was carried on the breeze, hinting at warmer days to come. On this particular day, the otherwise ordinary cadence of one family's life was poised to unravel, quietly, profoundly, and irrevocably. A man, his features marked by a growing sense of anxiety and a creeping disbelief, moved through the automatic doors of the Dong'an police station in Anyang City. His name was Lee Jin, and his purpose there was to convey something deeply unsettling, something that defied the logical order of his meticulously structured world. His concern was palpable. He had lost all contact with his parents, his father, Lee Sang-ho, aged 62, and his mother, Kim Mi-young, 58. For several days, their phones had remained stubbornly silent, their calls unanswered. Their familiar daily routines had simply ceased, as if they had quietly, inexplicably stepped away from their lives. Lee Jin conveyed his deep worry to the officer on duty, emphasizing that such prolonged silence was entirely uncharacteristic of his parents. He noted that they invariably answered his calls. The officer, identified as Officer Park, responded with a calm, almost dismissive tone, explaining that instances of two elderly individuals disappearing simultaneously were exceedingly rare. He suggested that most cases of missing elderly persons typically resolved themselves as simple misunderstandings, or at worst involved unforeseen medical emergencies while away from home. Officer Park inquired if Lee Jin had reached out to their friends, neighbors, or any other relatives. Lee Jin confirmed he had indeed contacted everyone he could think of, yet no one had seen his parents. He stressed that his parents had been in excellent health, with no underlying conditions that would suggest sudden incapacitation. He argued that even if one had fallen ill, the likelihood of both succumbing simultaneously without anyone knowing seemed practically impossible. He reiterated their careful habits and their consistent connection to family. For those acquainted with the typical police procedures in South Korean missing persons cases, Lee Jin's experience was, regrettably, quite common. A noticeable indifference often prevailed, a reluctance to commit significant resources to cases that did not immediately present as high priority. Even for reports of missing children, the initial response could be frustratingly slow, let alone for adult disappearances. This particular case, despite Lee Jin's fervent and heartfelt pleas, proved to be no exception. The police exhibited a notable lack of urgency regarding his report. Their accumulated experience, they seemed to imply, suggested that such a scenario was highly improbable, an unlikely statistical anomaly. After a brief, almost perfunctory consideration, they offered the suggestion that Lee Jin's parents had most likely embarked on an impromptu journey, perhaps a spontaneous vacation they simply had not bothered to mention to anyone. They advised him to exercise patience, to wait a few more days, assuring him that his parents would surely resurface. Lee Jin departed the station that day, a heavy, cold knot of dread tightening within him, the casual dismissal from the authorities doing little to calm his profound and growing unease. He felt, deep within his intuition, that something was profoundly, terribly amiss. Days slowly blurred into a week, then two. The silence emanating from his parents' home became an almost unbearable presence. Li Jin, unable to shake the pervasive and chilling sense of alarm that had taken root within him, returned to their residence, a quiet, unassuming suburban house nestled on the tranquil outskirts of Ansong. The very air surrounding the house felt heavy, stagnant, as if the structure itself was holding its breath in anticipation. He approached the front door, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the knob. The door yielded easily. It was unlocked. A sudden sharp chill snaked its way up his spine. Stepping inside, the interior of the house appeared outwardly undisturbed, yet it felt profoundly, starkly empty. There were no obvious signs of a hasty departure. No luggage stood by the door. No hastily scribbled farewell notes rested on the counter. The ordinary objects of daily life, a newspaper half read on the coffee table, a teacup left by the kitchen sink, seemed oddly frozen in time, betraying no urgency, no indication whatsoever of a planned journey. Li Jin's gaze swept across the living room, then moved to the kitchen, a creeping sense of unease steadily blossoming into outright panic. He called out their names, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. The silence that answered was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping rhythm of his own heart. He moved deliberately through the house, each slow step seeming to resonate loudly in the eerie quiet. Driven by an inexplicable yet insistent intuition, Li Jin ventured into the backyard, his eyes drawn towards a small, unassuming shed, typically utilized for gardening tools and other household sundries. As he drew nearer, a faint, unmistakably acrid odor reached him, something metallic and sickeningly sweet, a smell that clutched at his throat. His hand, now visibly trembling, reached for the shed's worn latch. The shed door groaned softly as it creaked open, slowly revealing a scene that would forever embed itself in the darkest corners of his memory, a vision destined to haunt his nightmares. Inside, amidst the array of gardening implements and dusty shelves, lay the lifeless forms of his parents. They had been bound, their mouths gagged, and their throats had been brutally, chillingly cut. The sheer barbarity of the act was sickening, a violent rupture of the quiet suburban peace that the neighborhood usually exuded. His father lay slumped against a stack of firewood, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring blankly at the dusty ceiling above. His mother's body was contorted unnaturally on the cold concrete floor, one hand outstretched as if in a final desperate silent plea for life. The shed, once a place of mundane utility, had been irrevocably transformed into a macabre tomb, a silent, horrifying testament to an unspeakable act of violence. Li Jin's scream, a raw, primal sound born of profound grief and utter terror, tore through the otherwise still afternoon, shattering its peace. The initial indifference displayed by the police was instantly shattered by the grim, undeniable reality of the discovery. Forensics teams quickly swarmed the scene, their specialized equipment glinting in the pale light. The quiet suburban street, moments before serene, was now transformed into a hive of intense activity. The flashing blue lights of emergency vehicles, painting stark, fleeting patterns across the overcast sky. The investigation, which had previously been a mere perfunctory formality, was now elevated to a full-blown murder inquiry, shrouded in the chilling mystery of a double homicide. The police, now fully mobilized and with a renewed sense of purpose, began their meticulous and painstaking work. They scoured every inch of the house, meticulously analyzing the grim crime scene for any clue, any piece of evidence that might shed light on the horrific events. They initiated extensive interviews with every possible witness, casting a wide net for information. The immediate and primary focus of their attention turned, quite naturally, to the victim's two sons, Li Jin, the dutiful son who had reported his parents missing and made the devastating discovery, and his elder brother, Li Han-sol. Li Han-sol stood in stark contrast to his younger brother. While Li Jin was known as an upright and responsible citizen, Han-sol possessed a documented history marred by fraud and various other illegal activities. He was widely known to have accumulated significant gambling debts over time and had a reputation for consistently extorting money from his parents, often resorting to threats and manipulative emotional tactics. It was a dark, unspoken secret that the family had long attempted to conceal, a persistent stain on their otherwise outwardly respectable facade. This troubled past immediately cast a long, ominous shadow over the burgeoning investigation. Given Han-sol's tumultuous history and the visibly strained dynamics within the family, the police quickly formulated a primary theory, that of a revenge killing. Perhaps Han-sol's illicit dealings had deeply angered someone, leading to the brutal murder of his parents as a form of cruel retribution. Or a far darker and more disturbing possibility. Perhaps Han-sol himself was directly involved, driven by an overwhelming sense of desperation or a twisted, perverse sense of entitlement. The detectives began to delve deeper into Han-sol's intricate network of connections, his known associates, and his whereabouts during the critical time frame of the murders. When questioned by the authorities, Han-sol's demeanor was notably unsettling. He appeared oddly calm, almost unnervingly detached, upon being informed of his parents' gruesome deaths. His responses to the police inquiries were vague, evasive, and subtly inconsistent, doing little to alleviate the suspicions against him. Crucially, he was unable to provide any credible alibi for the time when the murders were believed to have occurred. The suspicions surrounding him, initially a nagging doubt, gradually solidified into a palpable certainty in the minds of the lead detectives. However, just as the investigative net seemed to be drawing inexorably closer around Li Han-sol, a shocking and entirely unexpected discovery emerged, one that dramatically shifted the entire focus and direction of the investigation. While meticulously sifting through the deceased victim's intricate financial records, detectives uncovered compelling evidence of numerous fraudulent loans that had been taken out in the names of the now deceased parents. These were not inconsequential sums. They amounted to substantial, alarming debts, all meticulously disguised and hidden within a complex web of transactions. Further investigation, diligently peeling back the numerous layers of financial deception, revealed a deeply disturbing and uncomfortable truth. The elderly couple themselves had been complicit in these fraudulent activities. They had, it appeared, knowingly and willingly participated in schemes designed to defraud others. It was subsequently discovered that they had been lending money to a shadowy illicit loan shark, an individual operating deeply within the fringes of the underground economy. This particular loan shark, it was unearthed, had issued severe threats against them, promising dire consequences if they failed to meet their repayment obligations. The initial image of the innocent, unambiguously victimized elderly couple began to crumble, replaced by a far more complex, morally ambiguous, and unsettling reality. When this startling new information inevitably leaked to the media, public opinion, which had initially been overwhelmingly sympathetic to the victims, underwent a dramatic and deeply disturbing transformation. Headlines blared news of the elderly couple's involvement in clandestine financial schemes, painting them not simply as victims of a heinous crime, but as active participants in illicit activities. The news ignited a veritable firestorm of public debate, with many citizens expressing a perverse and unsettling sympathy for the unknown killer. The logic, though chillingly simple, resonated with some. If the victims themselves were engaged in criminal behavior, perhaps their deaths were a grim, albeit brutal consequence, a form of twisted poetic justice delivered by an aggrieved party. The initial widespread outrage at the murders slowly began to curdle into a grim satisfaction for a segment of the public. The police, navigating this treacherous and ethically complex shift in public sentiment, found their investigation abruptly redirected. The primary focus moved decisively away from the initial revenge-killing theory and squarely onto the shadowy, dangerous world of illegal loan sharks. They began the arduous task of tracking down individuals known to be deeply involved in such illicit operations, diligently following a convoluted and often dangerous trail of complex financial transactions and whispered, guarded rumors. The crucial breakthrough arrived unexpectedly, emerging from what seemed like a routine surveillance operation. A carefully placed wiretap on a known associate of the implicated loan shark intercepted a crucial and incriminating phone call. A man's voice, laced with a discernible mixture of fear and a strange bravado, was clearly heard confessing to the gruesome murders, detailing the brutal act with unsettling precision. He also expressed considerable frustration over the surprisingly meager amount of money he had managed to find at the crime scene. Disturbingly, he even mentioned receiving instructions to take out additional fraudulent loans in the victims' names, a chilling detail that confirmed the killer's cold intent to exploit their identities even after their deaths. Acting swiftly and decisively on this critical intelligence, police tracked the caller to a small, nondescript apartment located in a neighboring city. In a swift, impeccably coordinated pre-dawn raid, they successfully apprehended the man. His name was Kim Dong-wook, a career criminal with an extensive history of violent offenses, a man who had been deeply embedded within the illicit loan shark network for years, often serving as a ruthless enforcer. Under the intense and sustained pressure of interrogation, Kim Dong-wook eventually broke his silence. He confessed to the brutal and cold-blooded murders of Lee Sang-ho and Kim Mi-eun. His motive, he revealed, was not revenge, but something far more prosaic, yet equally sinister in its implications: simple robbery. He explained that he had been dispatched to the Lee residence to collect an overdue debt. However, when the Lees asserted they had no immediate money to offer, he perceived an opportunistic moment. He proceeded to murder them, harboring the expectation of discovering hidden cash and other valuables, and further intending to exploit their identities for a series of fraudulent loans. He admitted that his initial plan had merely been to intimidate them into compliance, but when they resisted his demands, the situation escalated violently and irreversibly. He recounted the horror of the deed with an unsettling, almost chilling detachment, describing how he had utilized a knife found in their own kitchen to silence them permanently. As the police investigation continued to unfold, it became increasingly apparent that Kim Dong-wook's actions were far from a spontaneous, impulsive act. He had arrived at the Lee residence equipped with zip ties and a clearly pre-existing plan to extract money, by force if deemed necessary. The murders, while perhaps not the absolute initial primary objective, were undeniably a calculated escalation, demonstrating a chilling willingness to resort to lethal violence in order to achieve his financial goals. his subsequent efforts to meticulously conceal the crime, to actively evade the ensuing investigation, and to exploit the victims' identities for further fraudulent gain, even after the act, all powerfully demonstrated an extremely malicious and deliberate intent. The trial of Kim Dong-wook captivated the nation's attention, drawing widespread public scrutiny. The inherent complexities of the case, compounded by the victim's own questionable involvement in illicit financial schemes and the utterly brutal nature of the crime itself, fueled an intense and often passionate public discussion. Despite the initial, albeit twisted, public sympathy for the killer due to the victim's involvement in dubious financial dealings, the sheer barbarity of the murders simply could not be overlooked or excused. The prosecution meticulously and compellingly presented their case, detailing the gruesome crime with stark clarity, highlighting the evident premeditation and emphasizing Kim Dong-wook's utter lack of remorse throughout the proceedings. The court, after carefully considering the profound severity of this heinous crime, the undeniable societal imperative to establish a strong deterrent effect, and the cold, calculated nature of Kim Dong-wook's actions, delivered a definitive and resolute verdict. He was found guilty on all counts, including the charge of premeditated murder. The sentence handed down was swift, uncompromising, and deeply impactful. Kim Dong-wook received the death penalty. It was a sentence that unequivocally reflected the immense gravity of his crimes, sending a stark, unwavering message that even in cases involving complicated victims, the taking of a human life, particularly in such a brutal and deliberate manner, would not be tolerated or met with leniency. In the somber aftermath of the trial, while a form of justice had been served for the murders, the unsettling shadow of the fraudulent brother Lee Hun-sol continued to linger ominously. Despite the profound tragedy that had so irrevocably befallen his own family, Lee Hun-sol, remaining true to his inherent nature, persisted in his illicit activities. He quietly vanished from the immediate public eye for a time, only to predictably resurface years later, still deeply entangled in various financial scandals, leaving in his wake a lamentable trail of new victims and broken promises. The Lee family, once a seemingly ordinary household, had been irrevocably scarred by a confluence of crime, deep-seated deceit, and a truly tragic end. Their story served as a stark and sobering reminder of the hidden darkness that can quietly fester beneath the seemingly calm surface of ordinary lives, and the devastating, far-reaching consequences that ripple outwards, touching everyone in their path. This particular case, while certainly unique in its specific details and circumstances, echoes a profound and universal truth, that the human capacity for both profound good and chilling evil knows no discernible bounds. The story of the Lee family, indelibly marred by tragedy and further compounded by an intricate and tangled web of deceit, stands as a chilling reminder of how swiftly the mundane aspects of existence can descend into the truly terrifying and unfathomable. As your thoughts begin to quiet tonight, and you perhaps feel the gentle pull of slumber, let this story resonate not as a source of unsettling fear, but rather as a somber yet compelling reflection on the intricate complexities of justice and the enduring, often perplexing mysteries of the human heart. Until our next quiet gathering, stay safe, and may your sleep be peaceful if you can. The Unseen Shadow, a silent disappearance. Welcome to this quiet moment, a space where stories unfold softly, inviting contemplation as the world outside fades. Tonight, we explore a disappearance that lingers in the memory like a half-forgotten dream, a tale of a life that simply ceased to be, leaving behind only questions and an unsettling silence. Before we begin our journey into this particular mystery, consider where you are now. Is your space peaceful, warm, inviting? Allow yourself to settle, to breathe deeply as we gently turn the page to a story that reminds us of the profound fragility of presence. Our narrative begins in the early spring of 2012, in the small, seemingly idyllic town of Havenwood, nestled deep within a valley in the Pacific Northwest. Havenwood was a place where life moved at a deliberately unhurried pace, where neighbors knew each other by name, and the rhythm of the seasons dictated the community's gentle pulse. Towering ancient fir trees stood sentinels on the surrounding hills, their vast, silent presence seemingly overseeing the quiet lives below. In this tranquil setting resided Alara Vance, a woman in her late 30s, known for her quiet demeanor, her meticulous routines, and her profound love for the arts, particularly painting. Her small cottage, perched on the edge of the woods, was a beacon of creativity, its windows often glowing late into the night as she worked on her canvases. Alara's life, while outwardly serene, possessed a subtle, almost imperceptible air of detachment. She was friendly but reserved, her social circle small and intimate. Her days unfolded with a comforting predictability. Morning walks through the dew-kissed woods, afternoons spent in her studio, the gentle scrape of her palette knife, the only sound, and evenings immersed in books or quiet reflection. She had a few close friends, mostly fellow artists, with whom she shared occasional meals and discussions about their craft. Her family lived some distance away, maintaining contact through infrequent phone calls and holiday visits. No one would have described Alara as a person who courted drama or attracted undue attention. Her existence was a quiet hum, a soft melody in the background of Havenwood's daily life. The first whisper of concern surfaced on a Tuesday, usually Alara's day for grocery shopping and a visit to the local library. The librarian, Martha, a woman of sharp observation and a kindly heart, noted Alara's absence. It wasn't entirely unusual for Alara to skip an outing if inspiration struck, but a missed library book return was almost unheard of for her. Martha made a mental note, a tiny prick of unease. Later that afternoon, Sarah, a fellow artist who shared a weekly critique session with Alara, tried calling her. The phone rang, unanswered, a hollow echo in the silent cottage. Sarah left a voicemail, a casual inquiry about their next meeting, trying to dismiss a nascent feeling of worry. As the week progressed, the subtle unease transformed into a more tangible concern. Alara did not respond to calls or texts. Her cottage remained dark in the evenings, its usual glow absent. The newspapers began to pile up on her porch, their crisp edges unfurling in the morning dew. Her beloved cat, a ginger tabby named Jasper, was observed by a neighbor, Mr. Henderson, perched on the windowsill, meowing plaintively, its usually well-groomed fur now slightly disheveled. Mr. Henderson, perched on the windowsill, meowing plaintively, its usually well-groomed fur now slightly disheveled. Mr. Henderson, a retired carpenter with a keen eye for detail, also noticed Alara's car, a modest silver sedan, still parked in her driveway, undisturbed. This was a critical detail, as Alara rarely left town without her vehicle. On Friday morning, with a sense of growing foreboding, Sarah drove to Alara's cottage. She knocked on the door, then again, more insistently. No answer. She peered through the windows, noting the same half-finished canvas on the easel, the same scattered brushes, the same untouched teacup on the table. Everything seemed frozen, as if Alara had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. The air inside felt cold, stale, conveying an unnerving sense of abandonment. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that something was profoundly wrong. She drove immediately to the Havenwood Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Brody, a man whose stern exterior belied a deep understanding of his small community, listened carefully as Sarah recounted her concerns. He noted her description of Alara's habits, her aversion to spontaneous travel, and the untouched car. He dispatched 2 deputies, Miller and Jenkins, to the cottage to conduct an initial welfare check. Their report confirmed Sarah's observations. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, nothing overtly amiss inside the home. Yet Alara Vance was simply gone. Her disappearance, initially a quiet ripple, began to stir the placid waters of Havenwood. The formal missing person investigation commenced. Sheriff Brody, recognizing the unusual nature of the case in a town where such events were rare, called in Detective Reyes from the county sheriff's office, a seasoned investigator known for his methodical approach. The cottage became a focal point of their inquiry. Forensic teams meticulously scoured every surface, searching for any anomalies, any microscopic trace that might offer a clue. They found nothing, no fingerprints other than Alara's, no foreign fibers, no disturbed dust. It was as if she had simply evaporated. Detectives interviewed Alara's friends and limited family members. Her friends described her as private but reliable. They affirmed her predictable routines and her dislike for unexpected changes. Her family expressed shock and distress, confirming her consistent nature. No one could fathom why she would leave without a word, abandoning her home, her art, and her beloved cat. There were no known enemies, no recent conflicts, no financial troubles, no romantic entanglements that might explain a sudden departure. Alara's life, by all accounts, was an open book, albeit one with very few dramatic chapters. The investigation then shifted to Alara's digital footprint. Her computer, her phone, her social media accounts, all were examined with painstaking detail. Her emails showed no suspicious correspondence. Her phone logs revealed only calls to her usual contacts and utility providers. Her social media presence was minimal, mostly sharing photos of her paintings, devoid of any personal drama or cryptic messages. Her bank accounts showed no unusual activity, no large withdrawals, no purchases that might suggest a planned escape. The financial trail, usually a clear indicator of intent, was utterly silent. This lack of digital evidence only deepened the mystery, suggesting a departure that was either incredibly well planned or entirely unexpected. The Havenwood community, initially shocked, now began to feel the heavy weight of apprehension. Flyers with Alara's serene portrait were posted in every shop window, on lampposts, and in the community center. Local news channels picked up the story, their reporters describing Havenwood as a town grappling with an unsettling void. Volunteers organized search parties, combing the vast, dense woods surrounding Alara's cottage, their calls echoing through the quiet wilderness. They explored abandoned cabins, dense thickets, and remote trails, but found no trace. The forest, ancient and indifferent, held its secrets close. Detective Reyes, accustomed to cases with clear motives or obvious struggles, found himself in a unique quandary. The absence of any signs of foul play within the cottage was perplexing. If Alara had been abducted, it had happened without a sound, leaving no physical evidence. If she had left voluntarily, she had done so with an unparalleled level of premeditation and secrecy, abandoning everything that anchored her to her life. The lack of clues was in itself a chilling clue. It pointed to an unseen shadow, an undetectable presence. As weeks turned into months, the initial flurry of activity began to wane. The search parties became smaller, the news coverage less frequent. The missing person flyers, once crisp and bright, began to fade and curl at the edges, slowly becoming part of the familiar landscape. Yet, for Sheriff Brody and Detective Reyes, Alara Vance's disappearance remained a gnawing enigma, a puzzle with too many missing pieces. They revisited interviews, re-examined evidence, and re-walked the path to Alara's cottage, hoping for a new perspective, a missed detail. During one of these re-examinations, Detective Reyes focused on a curious detail that had been logged but not fully appreciated, a single faint scratch on the exterior of Alara's cottage, near a window at the back. It was small, almost imperceptible, easily dismissed as a random mark from a branch or accidental contact. However, its position, low to the ground and slightly obscured by overgrown bushes, made him pause. It was too precise, too deliberate for a casual abrasion. He had the forensic team re-examine it. Under closer magnification, they identified microscopic traces of dark paint, not from the cottage itself, but a foreign substance. This small, seemingly insignificant detail reignited a spark in the cold case. Detective Reyes began to consider the possibility of an intruder who was exceptionally careful, who left minimal traces. The dark paint suggested something brought to the scene, something that left a mark on contact. He returned to Alara's life, looking for connections, however remote, to anyone who might possess such a distinctive item. His attention was drawn to a local art supplier, a small independent shop Alara frequented. The shop owner, Mr. Silas, remembered Alara well, describing her as a valued customer. Reyes inquired about unusual purchases, anything that might be out of character. Mr. Silas mentioned that several months prior to Alara's disappearance, she had expressed concern about a particular customer. This customer, a man in his late 40s named Marcus Thorne, was also an artist, but one known for his intense, almost obsessive focus on other artists' work, particularly Alara's. He had purchased several of Alara's smaller pieces from a local gallery and had on more than one occasion lingered at the art supply shop, making inquiries about Alara's preferred brands of paint and brushes, even asking about her schedule. Mr. Silas had dismissed it as artistic admiration, but in retrospect, a disquieting edge to Thorne's interest now surfaced. Thorne's signature color in his own abstract works was a very dark, almost black, industrial-grade acrylic. Detective Reyes obtained a search warrant for Marcus Thorne's studio, located in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Havenwood. The studio was a chaotic symphony of vibrant colors and half-finished canvases. As detectives meticulously searched, they discovered a large, custom-made wooden art crate, similar to those used to transport large paintings. This crate had a fresh, faint scratch on its side, and within that scratch, forensic analysis confirmed the presence of microscopic paint traces that matched the sample found on Alara's cottage. Marcus Thorne was brought in for questioning. He presented himself as a passionate, if eccentric, artist. He readily admitted his admiration for Alara's work, even confessing to visiting her cottage on occasion, sometimes just to observe her from a distance, driven by what he termed artistic inspiration. He vehemently denied any involvement in her disappearance, claiming to have been working in his studio alone during the time she vanished. However, Detective Reyes pressed him on the wooden crate and the matching paint. Thorne's demeanor shifted. His artistic fervor gave way to a strained silence, then a nervous tremor. He began to contradict himself, his story unraveling. Faced with the mounting circumstantial evidence, he eventually confessed, his voice barely a whisper. Thorne admitted that his admiration for Alara had spiraled into an unhealthy obsession. He believed he needed her essence, her unique artistic vision to complete his own magnum opus. On the night of her disappearance, he had approached her cottage, not with violence in mind, but with a misguided desire to persuade her to collaborate. He had brought the wooden crate, intending to transport her most prized unfinished painting back to his studio. He had tapped on her window, startled her, and in the ensuing moments of panic and struggle, Elara had fallen, hitting her head. The impact had been fatal. In a state of terror and profound shock, Thorn had made a horrifying decision. He had placed Elara's body inside the large art crate, sealed it, and under the cover of darkness, loaded it into his own van. He had driven for hours to a remote, seldom-used logging road deep within the vast ancient forest miles from Havenwood. There, he had buried the crate and Elara's body beneath a thick carpet of pine needles and decaying leaves, camouflaging the disturbed earth with natural debris, intending for her to become as unseen as the shadows of the forest itself. He had then driven her car back to her cottage, leaving it in her driveway to maintain the illusion of a voluntary departure. Thorn described how he had meticulously cleaned his van and his studio, destroying any clothing or tools that might have carried traces of the crime. He had convinced himself that no one would ever connect him to Elara, believing his actions had been flawless, leaving no discernible trail. The scratch on the wooden crate and the microscopic paint, however, were the silent witnesses he could not erase, the tiny threads that unspooled his carefully constructed lie. The discovery of Elara Vance's remains brought a somber closure to Havenwood, but it did not diminish the profound sorrow. The quiet town, once defined by its peace, now carried the heavy burden of a hidden tragedy, a testament to the unseen shadows that can lurk even in the most serene of places. Marcus Thorn was charged with murder. During the trial, his defense attempted to portray the act as accidental, a tragic misstep born of artistic fervor. However, the prosecution presented a compelling case of calculated concealment and a chilling disregard for human life, emphasizing his meticulous efforts to hide the crime. The jury returned a verdict of guilty, and Thorn received a sentence that reflected the gravity of his actions. The story of Elara Vance serves as a quiet reminder that even in the most tranquil settings, an unseen shadow can emerge, leaving behind a silence that speaks volumes. It underscores the insidious nature of obsession and the painstaking unraveling of secrets long held in the dark. As the quiet descends around you and you prepare for rest, may the stillness bring not unease, but a gentle comfort, knowing that even the deepest shadows can eventually be illuminated by the unwavering light of truth. This story is only 15,000 characters. The world will einmal I've Samamalukal, and Furs Tapra Tessel de Gendir. Here is a further expanded script for the unseen shadow, a silent disappearance, aiming for approximately 50,000 characters, maintaining the calming tone for sleep, and with all first-person dialogue and structural elements removed. The Unseen Shadow, a silent disappearance. Welcome to this quiet space, a moment where stories gently unfurl, inviting a sense of peaceful contemplation as the day's demands recede. Tonight, we journey into a disappearance that continues to echo in the collective memory, a narrative of a life that seemed to softly dissipate, leaving behind only an unsettling void and a multitude of unanswered questions. Before we embark upon this particular mystery, allow your thoughts to settle, your breath to deepen, and your body to relax. Consider the quiet comfort of your surroundings. Wherever you may be listening, allow the narrative to wash over you, a gentle current guiding you towards a restful state. Our story begins in the nascent days of spring, in the year 2012, within the serene embrace of Havenwood, a small, seemingly idyllic town nestled deep within a verdant valley in the heart of the Pacific Northwest. Havenwood was a community where the very essence of life moved at a deliberately unhurried pace, a place where the faces of neighbors were intimately known and the gentle, predictable rhythms of the changing seasons dictated the quiet pulse of daily existence. Towering ancient fir trees stood as silent, majestic sentinels on the surrounding hills, their vast, imposing presence seemingly overseeing the tranquil lives unfolding below. In this haven of peace resided Alara Vance, a woman in her late 30s, distinguished by her quiet, introspective demeanor, her almost ritualistic adherence to meticulous routines, and her profound, unwavering devotion to the arts, most notably painting. Her small, quaint cottage, gracefully positioned on the verdant edge of the embracing woods, served as a modest but powerful beacon of creativity, its windows frequently glowing with a soft, inviting light late into the night as she immersed herself in the quiet, consuming world of her canvases. Alara's life, while outwardly radiating a sense of profound serenity, possessed a subtle, almost imperceptible aura of detachment. She was invariably friendly and polite, yet maintained a reserved distance, her social circle deliberately small and intimately curated. Her days unfolded with a comforting, almost rhythmic predictability. Early morning walks through the dew-kissed woods, where the air was crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Tranquil afternoons spent in the solitary communion of her sun-dappled studio, the soft, rhythmic scrape of her palette knife against canvas, often the only sound to break the stillness, and contemplative evenings immersed in the pages of cherished books or lost in quiet, profound reflection. Her close friendships were few, primarily confined to fellow artists with whom she shared occasional, thoughtful meals and engaged in deep, insightful discussions about the nuances of their craft. Her family resided some considerable distance away, maintaining contact through infrequent, cordial phone calls and the cherished rituals of holiday visits. No one who knew Alara, even superficially, would have ever described her as a person who actively sought out drama or one who inadvertently attracted undue attention. Her existence was a quiet hum, a soft, harmonious melody that played gently in the background of Havenwood's daily, unassuming life. The first faint whisper of concern regarding Alara's well-being surfaced on a particular Tuesday, a day typically reserved for her routine grocery shopping and a cherished visit to the local public library. The librarian, Martha, a woman of astute observation and a kindly, empathetic heart, was the first to distinctly note Alara's unexplained absence. While it was not entirely unheard of for Alara to occasionally forego an outing if a surge of artistic inspiration took hold, a missed library book return was an almost unprecedented event for her. So diligently punctual was she. Martha made a quiet mental note, a tiny prick of unease beginning to form within her. Later that same afternoon, Sarah, a fellow artist who shared a beloved weekly critique session with Alara, attempted to reach her by phone. The phone rang repeatedly, each unanswered chime echoing with a hollow emptiness in the silent cottage. Sarah left a voicemail, a seemingly casual inquiry about their next scheduled meeting, endeavoring to dismiss a nascent, unwelcome feeling of worry that began to stir within her. As the days slowly, inexorably bled into the rest of the week, the subtle undercurrent of unease steadily intensified, transforming into a more tangible and pronounced concern. Alara did not respond to any of the subsequent calls or text messages that her friends sent. Her cottage, usually a comforting beacon of light, remained conspicuously dark in the evenings, its customary warm glow noticeably absent. The local newspapers began to accumulate on her porch, their crisp folded edges slowly unfurling and dampening in the morning dew, a stark testament to her prolonged absence. Her beloved cat, a handsome ginger tabby named Jasper, a creature known for its fastidious grooming, was observed by a vigilant neighbor, Mr. Henderson, perched forlornly on the windowsill, emitting a plaintive, mournful meow, its usually pristine fur now slightly disheveled and matted. Mr. Henderson, perched forlornly on the windowsill, emitting a plaintive, mournful meow, its usually pristine fur now slightly disheveled and matted. Henderson, a retired carpenter with a remarkably keen eye for minute details, also noted a crucial piece of information. Alara's car, a modest silver sedan, remained conspicuously parked in her driveway, entirely undisturbed. This was a particularly significant detail, as Alara was known to rarely, if ever, leave town without her reliable vehicle. On the crisp Friday morning, burdened by an escalating sense of foreboding, Sarah drove purposefully to Alara's quiet cottage. She knocked firmly on the front door, then again more insistently, her knuckles rapping against the wood. Still, no answer. She peered cautiously through the windows, observing the same half-finished canvas resting on the easel, the same scattered array of brushes, the same untouched teacup sitting precisely where it had been left on the table. Everything within the cottage appeared to be unnervingly frozen in time, as if Alara had merely stepped out for a fleeting moment and had simply never returned. The very air inside the home felt cold, stagnant, conveying an unnerving and profound sense of abandonment. Sarah knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that something was profoundly and terribly amiss. Without hesitation, she drove immediately to the Havenwood Sheriff's Department, her heart thumping with a heavy, persistent rhythm. Sheriff Brody, a man whose seemingly stern exterior belied a deep, intuitive understanding of his small, close-knit community, listened with an attentive and grave demeanor as Sarah meticulously recounted her accumulating concerns. He carefully noted her precise description of Alara's predictable habits, her well-known aversion to spontaneous or unplanned travel, and the crucial detail of her untouched parked car. Without delay, he dispatched 2 of his deputies, Miller and Jenkins, to the cottage to conduct an initial, official welfare check. Their subsequent report corroborated Sarah's observations perfectly. There were no discernible signs of forced entry, no indications of a struggle, and nothing overtly amiss within the meticulously kept home. Yet the stark, undeniable truth remained. Alara Vance had simply vanished. Her disappearance, initially a quiet, almost imperceptible ripple on the surface of the community, began, slowly but surely, to stir the placid, peaceful waters of Havenwood, sending ever-widening circles of unease outwards. The formal missing person investigation commenced with a heightened sense of urgency. Sheriff Brody, fully recognizing the highly unusual nature of such a case, in a town where such events were exceedingly rare, made the decision to call in Detective Reyes from the county sheriff's office. Detective Reyes was a seasoned and highly respected investigator, renowned for his methodical approach, his keen analytical mind, and his unwavering persistence. The cottage, once a private sanctuary, now became the central, most critical focal point of their intensive inquiry. Forensic teams, moving with silent precision, meticulously scoured every surface, every nook and cranny, searching for any minute anomaly, any microscopic trace of evidence that might conceivably offer a clue, a thread to follow. They found nothing, no discernible fingerprints other than Alara's own, no foreign fibers, no disturbed dust patterns, no overturned objects. It was as if she had simply, impossibly, evaporated into thin air. Detectives proceeded to conduct exhaustive interviews with Alara's close friends and her limited circle of family members. Her friends consistently described her as a private individual, but one who was unfailingly reliable and consistently predictable. They firmly affirmed her ingrained routines and her distinct dislike for unexpected changes or disruptions. Her family, distraught and in deep distress, corroborated her consistently reliable nature, expressing profound shock at her unexplained absence. No one, absolutely no one, could begin to fathom why she would willingly leave without uttering a single word, abandoning her cherished home, her beloved art, and her affectionate cat. There were no known enemies, no recent conflicts or disagreements, no apparent financial troubles, and no romantic entanglements that could possibly provide a plausible explanation for such a sudden and enigmatic departure. Alara's life, by all accounts available to them, appeared to be an open book, albeit one notably devoid of any dramatic or unsettling chapters. The investigation then systematically shifted its focus to Alara's digital footprint, a modern-day trail of breadcrumbs. Her computer, her mobile phone, and her limited social media accounts all were meticulously examined with painstaking and exhaustive detail. Her email communications revealed no suspicious correspondence, no cryptic messages, no desperate pleas. Her phone logs showed only calls to her usual, expected contacts and to various utility providers. Her social media presence was notably minimal, primarily consisting of shared photographs of her serene paintings, entirely devoid of any personal drama or ambiguous, hidden messages. Her bank accounts displayed no unusual or large-scale activity, no significant withdrawals, no uncharacteristic purchases that might possibly suggest a secretly planned escape or journey. The financial trail, typically a clear and often revealing indicator of a person's intent, was in this case utterly frustratingly silent. This glaring lack of any digital evidence only served to deepen the profound mystery, suggesting a departure that was either incredibly well orchestrated and meticulously planned, or entirely and shockingly unexpected. The Havenwood community, initially reeling from shock, now began to feel the heavy, oppressive weight of apprehension and pervasive unease. Flyers bearing Alara's serene portrait, a gentle smile gracing her lips, were diligently posted in every shop window, affixed to lampposts, and displayed prominently in the local community center. Local news channels, their appetite for human interest stories piqued, quickly picked up the narrative, their on-site reporters describing Havenwood as a once peaceful town, now grappling with an unsettling and inexplicable void. Volunteers, driven by a shared concern for their missing neighbor, organized extensive search parties, meticulously combing the vast, dense, and often unforgiving woods that surrounded Alara's quiet cottage, their worried calls echoing plaintively through the ancient wilderness. They methodically explored abandoned cabins, pushed through dense, thorny thickets, and navigated remote, winding trails, but their exhaustive efforts yielded no trace whatsoever of Alara. The forest, ancient and seemingly indifferent to human plight, held its secrets close, unyielding. Detective Reyes, a man accustomed to cases with clear motives or readily apparent signs of struggle, found himself in a truly unique and perplexing quandary. The profound absence of any signs of foul play within the meticulously preserved cottage was, to him, utterly perplexing. If Alara had indeed been abducted, it had occurred without a single sound, leaving behind absolutely no physical evidence, no shattered glass, no disturbed furniture. If she had, alternatively, left voluntarily, she had done so with an unparalleled level of premeditation and an almost impossible degree of secrecy, abandoning every single anchor that connected her to her established life. The overwhelming lack of any discernible clues was, in itself, a chilling and powerful clue. It strongly pointed to the unsettling presence of an unseen shadow, an undetectable influence, operating with chilling precision. As the weeks slowly, inevitably, turned into months, the initial flurry of intense investigative and community activity began, inexorably to wane. The once large search parties dwindled in size, their numbers shrinking with each passing day. The local news coverage became less frequent, eventually fading into occasional mentions. The missing person flyers, once crisp and brightly colored, began to fade under the relentless sun and curl at the edges, slowly becoming an almost invisible part of the familiar landscape. Yet, for Sheriff Brody and Detective Reyes, Elara Vance's inexplicable disappearance remained a gnawing enigma, a deeply frustrating puzzle with far too many crucial pieces still conspicuously missing. They tirelessly revisited interviews, meticulously re-examined every scrap of evidence, and patiently re-walked the winding path to Elara's quiet cottage, endlessly hoping for a new perspective, a previously missed crucial detail to emerge from the pervasive silence. During one of these meticulous re-examinations of the crime scene, Detective Reyes's keen eye was drawn to a curious detail that had been logged in the initial report but had not been fully appreciated for its potential significance. A single faint scratch on the exterior of Elara's cottage, located subtly near a window at the back of the house. It was remarkably small, almost imperceptible to the casual glance, easily dismissed as a random mark left by a stray branch or an accidental brush with some object. However, its precise position, low to the ground and somewhat obscured by a tangle of overgrown bushes, caused him to pause, to scrutinize it more closely. It seemed too precise, too deliberate for a casual, random abrasion. He immediately requested that the forensic team return and re-examine it with even greater scrutiny. Under closer magnification and specialized lighting, they identified microscopic traces of a dark foreign paint embedded within the scratch, a substance clearly not from the cottage itself, but introduced from an external source. This small, seemingly insignificant detail, a mere whisper of evidence, unexpectedly reignited a vital spark in the increasingly cold case. Detective Reyes began to seriously consider the unsettling possibility of an intruder, an individual who was exceptionally careful, who left behind only the most minimal and easily overlooked traces. The dark paint unequivocally suggested something brought to the scene, an object that had made contact and left an indelible mark. He then returned to a deeper examination of Elara's life, searching for any connections, however remote or seemingly innocuous, to anyone who might conceivably possess such a distinctive item, something that could carry that particular dark foreign paint. His attention was then drawn, almost instinctively, to a local art supplier, a small independent shop that Elara was known to frequent regularly for her artistic materials. The shop owner, Mr. Silas, a man with a sharp memory for his customers, remembered Elara very well, describing her as a valued and consistent patron. Reyes inquired specifically about any unusual purchases made by Elara, anything that might be out of character for her, or any other customers who had shown an unusual interest in her. Mr. Silas then recalled a particular customer, a man in his late 40s, named Marcus Thorne, who had been a source of slight unease for Elara several months prior to her disappearance. This Marcus Thorne was also an artist, but one known for his intense, almost obsessive focus on the work of other artists, and specifically Elara's. He had purchased several of Elara's smaller finished pieces from a local gallery, and had, on more than one occasion, been observed lingering unusually long at the art supply shop, making overly detailed inquiries about Alara's preferred brands of paint and brushes, even subtly asking about her usual schedule. Mr. Paris, Silas had initially dismissed this behavior as mere artistic admiration, perhaps a bit fervent, but in retrospect, a deeply disquieting and unsettling edge to Thorne's interest now undeniably surfaced. Crucially, Thorne's signature color in his own distinctive abstract works was a very dark, almost black, industrial-grade acrylic paint. Detective Reyes, now armed with this compelling new lead, swiftly obtained a search warrant for Marcus Thorne's art studio, which was housed in a converted warehouse on the quiet industrial outskirts of Havenwood. The studio itself was a chaotic yet vibrant symphony of colors, a dynamic space filled with large, half-finished canvases, tubes of paint, and scattered brushes. As detectives meticulously conducted their search, their trained eyes discovered a large custom-made wooden art crate, noticeably similar in construction to those used for transporting particularly large paintings. This specific crate bore a fresh, albeit faint, scratch on its side. Within that seemingly insignificant scratch, forensic analysis conclusively confirmed the presence of microscopic paint traces that perfectly matched the distinct dark paint sample found on the exterior of Alara's cottage. Marcus Thorne was subsequently brought in for thorough questioning. He presented himself initially as a passionate, if somewhat eccentric, artist. He readily admitted his profound admiration for Alara's artistic work, even going so far as to confess to visiting her cottage on occasion, sometimes merely to observe her from a distance, driven, as he claimed, by a powerful urge for artistic inspiration. He vehemently denied any direct involvement in her perplexing disappearance, asserting that he had been diligently working in his studio alone during the entire time frame she was believed to have vanished. However, Detective Reyes, persistent and unwavering, pressed Thorne on the crucial evidence of the wooden crate and the undeniable presence of the matching paint. Thorne's carefully constructed demeanor visibly shifted. His initial artistic fervor and almost aloof confidence gave way to a strained, unnerving silence, which then rapidly devolved into a nervous tremor that ran through his body. He began to contradict himself, his carefully rehearsed story slowly and inexorably unraveling under the weight of the evidence. Faced with the mounting and irrefutable circumstantial evidence, he eventually, reluctantly confessed, his voice barely a raw whisper, barely audible in the quiet interrogation room. Thorne admitted that his initial artistic admiration for Alara had spiraled, uncontrollably, into an unhealthy, consuming obsession. He had developed a deeply twisted belief that he needed her very essence, her unique and extraordinary artistic vision, to achieve the ultimate completion of his own magnum opus, a grand, ambitious painting that he felt was incomplete without her influence. On the fateful night of her disappearance, he recounted, he had approached her quiet cottage, not with the initial intent of violence, but with a misguided, desperate desire to somehow persuade her to collaborate with him, to merge their artistic souls. He had brought the large wooden crate with him, intending, he claimed, to transport her most prized unfinished painting back to his own studio for this forced collaboration. He had gently tapped on her window, a soft sound in the still night, but it had startled her profoundly. In the ensuing moments of panic, confusion, and a desperate struggle, Alara had tragically fallen, hitting her head with a dull thud. The impact, he chillingly explained, had been fatal. In a state of overwhelming terror and profound shock, Thorne had made a horrifying and irreversible decision. He had carefully, yet frantically, placed Alara's lifeless body inside the large wooden art crate, meticulously sealed it shut, and then, under the dense concealing shroud of deepest darkness, loaded it into his own van. He had driven for countless hours to a truly remote, seldom used logging road nestled deep within the vast ancient forest, many miles from the now haunted tranquility of Havenwood. There, with grim determination, he had buried the heavy crate and Alara's body beneath a thick, concealing carpet of fragrant pine needles and decaying leaves, artfully camouflaging the disturbed earth with natural debris, intending for her to become as utterly unseen and forgotten as the fleeting shadows of the forest itself. He had then, with chilling precision, driven her own car back to her cottage, carefully leaving it in her driveway to maintain the insidious illusion of a voluntary, unannounced departure, an unexplained vanishing act. Thorn meticulously detailed how he had then obsessively cleaned his van and his studio, destroying any clothing or tools that might have carried the slightest traces of the crime, convinced he had erased every single piece of evidence. He had deluded himself into believing that no one would ever possibly connect him to Alara, firmly convinced that his actions had been flawlessly executed, leaving behind no discernible trail, no breadcrumbs for anyone to follow. The faint scratch on the wooden crate and the microscopic, almost invisible specks of paint, however, were the silent, steadfast witnesses he could not erase, the tiny, almost imperceptible threads that slowly, inexorably unspooled his carefully constructed tapestry of lies and deception. The eventual discovery of Alara Vance's remains brought a profound, albeit somber, closure to the bewildered community of Havenwood, but it did little to diminish the deep abiding sorrow that settled over the town. The quiet community, once primarily defined by its peaceful, unassuming charm, now carried the heavy, enduring burden of a deeply hidden tragedy, a chilling testament to the unseen, malevolent shadows that can, tragically lurk, even in the most outwardly serene and tranquil of places. Marcus Thorn was subsequently charged with murder. During the ensuing trial, his defense team attempted to meticulously portray the act as accidental, a tragic and unforeseen misstep born purely of a misdirected artistic fervor. However, the prosecution presented a compelling, irrefutable case of calculated concealment and a chilling, profound disregard for human life, powerfully emphasizing his meticulous and deliberate efforts to hide the crime from discovery. The jury, after careful deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty, and Thorn received a sentence that unequivocally reflected the immense gravity and cold calculation of his reprehensible actions. The story of Alara Vance stands as a quiet yet powerful reminder that even in the most tranquil and seemingly secure settings, an unseen shadow can tragically emerge from the depths, leaving behind it a profound silence that speaks volumes, echoing with loss. It starkly underscores the insidious and corrosive nature of unchecked obsession and the painstaking, inevitable unraveling of secrets that have been long held, desperately hidden in the suffocating darkness. As the quiet descends around you and you gently prepare for the embrace of rest, may the stillness bring not unease, but a profound, comforting sense of peace, a quiet assurance that even the deepest, most carefully concealed shadows can, eventually, be illuminated by the unwavering, persistent light of truth, bringing a semblance of closure to those who seek it.